We have officially reached the year 2026, and that means it's time for our annual recap of what we covered on this podcast, a look at listener stats, and any growth we experienced. So grab a beverage of your choice and get comfortable. Or if you're like me and listen to podcasts while you're out walking or commuting, turn up the volume and enjoy a look back at Missing in the Carolinas 2025. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Episode 165, the 2025 Year in Review for Missing in the Carolinas. Welcome, everyone. I like to do these end-of-year recaps because it helps me plan out future content, and if I'm to be honest, helps me to decide if I want to continue producing the podcast. As you know, it's a lot of work, and I'm the primary researcher, writer, editor, social media specialist, and then some. When my daughter Mia Robertson is home from college on her breaks throughout the year, she assists me with social media and research and writing. But for the most part, I'm on my own. For the second year in a row, I released weekly episodes with a few exceptions. Because this podcast has been running for 5 years now, I decided to repurpose older content about once a month and release it as part of the regular schedule. For example, I've shared various folklore and stories of ghostly apparitions in the South over the years, usually in the fall. This past October, I pulled together several of those segments into an episode titled Stories of Spirits in the Carolinas. I find this works well because a lot of newer listeners may not have gone far enough back in the catalog to hear some of these cases. In mid-September, I went out of the country for a few weeks on a dream cruise to Greece and Turkey, so I reran some older episodes during that time. Another change I made this year was switching my podcast host from SoundCloud to Spotify back in February and using a new platform called Riverside FM to record episodes. As you've probably heard in my sponsor messages, using Riverside has allowed me to integrate video into the podcast production. My YouTube and Instagram followers have been steadily growing since I began doing this, so I'm glad I made the switch. This past May, I celebrated 5 years of Missing in the Carolinas. It's hard to believe that my pandemic podcast project continues to grow and make strides. The show has helped me grow a platform in the true crime space and possibly give me an exciting opportunity in the new year. I'll keep you posted if it develops further. Last year, I shared that a suspense thriller novel I'd written had garnered interest from a few literary agents. While that was exciting, over a year later, I still don't have an offer of representation. The book is currently under consideration with a small publishing house, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I do think the genre of the book would appeal to the listeners of this podcast, so I'm not giving up on it just yet. I may hire a book doctor to help me with developmental edits I have, and then continue to submit it. Now let's talk podcast stats. Analyzing download numbers has always been a little difficult because every podcast platform presents them in a different way. I do know that listeners consume the podcast mostly on Spotify and not as much on Apple Podcasts, which are my two main platforms. Spotify is our main podcast host. I switched over from SoundCloud earlier this year, and it's been easier to analyze stats this way. Missing in the Carolinas released 42 new episodes this year. We'll talk Spotify stats first. The show has 8,803 followers on the platform, a 9% increase from last year. Spotify listeners spent 916,000 minutes consuming the show this past year, equivalent to 636 days of listening. Episode 146, The Unsolved Murder of Brenda Holland, Part 2, received the most comments on the platform. Missing in the Carolinas has been streamed more than 665,000 times across all platforms. Each episode receives more than 1,000 downloads within the first few weeks of publication. The top countries listening to the show on Spotify are number 1, the United States, number 2, Canada, number 3, Australia, number 4, United Kingdom, and number 5, Ireland. 60% of Spotify listeners binge 2 or more episodes in one day. People who listen to Missing in the Carolinas also listen to Dateline NBC, 48 Hours, Crime Junkie, Murder in America, and The Vanished. 40.4% of listeners are 45 and older. 24.6% are 35 to 44. 10.6% are 28 to 34. 77.2% of listeners are female, 18.2% are male, and 3.6% are not specified. Top artists for listeners of this podcast are number 1, Taylor Swift, number 2, Morgan Wallen, number 3, Kendrick Lamar, number 4, Zach Bryan, and number 5, Teddy Swims. Their top audiobook listens are number 1, The Missing Half by Ashley Flowers and Alex Keister, number 2, The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden, number 3, The Housemaid by Frida McFadden, number 4, Girl Alone, an Ella Dark FBI suspense thriller by Blake Pierce, and number 5, His Other Wife, a Stella Fall psychological suspense thriller by Ava Strong. We're a top 10 show for 986 fans on Spotify. It has been shared more than 96% of other shows on the platform. The average podcast rating is 4.4 stars. Here are the top 5 episodes downloaded from 2025 on Spotify. Episode 153, The Murder of Janet Siclari in Nag's Head and the Unsolved Murder of Denise Johnson in Kill Devil Hills. In August of 1993, 35-year-old Janet Siclari was murdered on the last night of her vacation on the Outer Banks within walking distance to her hotel room. Based on physical evidence left on her body at the scene, investigators were able to pinpoint the killer 4 years later with the help of CODIS. I also talked about the still unsolved murder of 33-year-old Kill Devil Hills resident Denise Johnson. Here's a clip from the episode. I wanted to mention another murder from the Outer Banks that I came across while researching this case. I first saw it mentioned in an article that ran in the July 27, 1997 edition of the Virginian Pilot. When the Nags Head police chief, Charles Cameron, said a suspect for Janet Siclari's murder had been identified in the prison system, he added, "The suspect was not in Dare County recently and is in no way connected to this month's murder of Kill Devil Hills resident Denise F. Johnson." So who was Denise Johnson? She was a 33-year-old native of Kill Devil Hills who was back living in the childhood home she and her family grew up in after her mother's death. She was the youngest of 6 children. According to her sister Donnie, she was bubbly, outgoing, friendly, and had a lot of friends. She loved animals and hoped to one day be a veterinarian. She moved to Florida not long after graduating from high school, but returned back to Kill Devil Hills when she was 26 and her mother first grew ill. At the time of her death, she was working at a local restaurant, the Barrier Island Inn. In the early morning hours of July 13, 1997, firefighters responded to a home on the 2000 block of Norfolk Street in Kill Devil Hills. Inside, they discovered Denise's body within the flames. It didn't take long for them to figure out she'd been stabbed to death prior to the fire, which seemed to have been set deliberately. Firefighters found Denise lying on the floor of the bathroom, covered in blood. A firefighter carried her out of the house to attempt CPR before realizing it was too late. Local police asked for assistance from the SBI in the case. An autopsy revealed Denise had been stabbed at least a half a dozen times with a knife, mostly in the neck, and those injuries, along with smoke inhalation, contributed to her death. She did not appear to have been sexually assaulted. The second most downloaded episode on Spotify was episode 154, 5 Crimes from the North Carolina Mountains. I pulled from the catalog to discuss the cold case of Nancy Morgan from Madison County, Beverly Sherman and Pamela Murray from Asheville, the murder of Denise Durham from East Flat Rock, and the workplace shooting of Michelle Marlowe in Hickory. Here's a clip from the episode. But the situation that unfolded in January of 2021 is something we don't often hear about. It involved an incident of violence and murder between 2 female employees. Michelle Marlowe was a Caldwell County native, wife and mother of 2, and grandmother of 2, and she was employed as an upholsterer at TCS Designs. TCS Designs is a manufacturer of upholstered fabric and leather products for both residential and commercial markets located in Hickory, North Carolina. On the afternoon of January 13th, her coworker, 49-year-old Tangela Parker, entered the area where Michelle was working and shot her with a .357 Magnum revolver. Michelle turned and tried to run, but Parker then shot her in the back of the head. Following the shooting, Tangela's husband Eric, who worked as a supervisor at TCS Designs, approached his wife, took the gun from her, walked her to their car, a beige 2019 Honda CR-V. Then they left the premises. Michelle was still alive when officers arrived on the scene, but she died at the hospital as a result of her injuries a few hours later. Investigators believed the couple from Alexander County was headed to the Smoky Mountains region of the United States. They enlisted the help of the U.S. Forest Service in the search for Tangela and Eric. The U.S. Forest Service worked to distribute information to all their Park Service and special agents in the area from North Carolina to Tennessee and circulated information around campgrounds. The search also extended to the entire East Coast, with the U.S. Marshals Service offering a $10,000 reward in the case. After Michelle's death, her family heard from people that worked at the plant that Tangela Parker had a reputation for being aggressive and argumentative. Michelle's daughter, Michaela, said there were times she could hear Tangela in the background yelling at people when she talked to her mother on the phone. In an article that ran in the Hickory Daily Record on January 23, 2021, Michelle's husband, Justin, said Tangela had been bullying his wife. The week before the murder, he said the two women had what he called a silly dispute over moving tables in their work area, resulting in a 3-day unpaid suspension for Tangela after she threatened Michelle. There was also another previous verbal confrontation on July 28, 2020. Next was episode 145, The Unsolved Murder of Brenda Holland in the OBX, Part 1. In the summer of 1967, 19-year-old Brenda Holland took a job as a makeup supervisor with the Lost Colony Outdoor Drama in Manteo, North Carolina. Excited to continue training for a potential career in the theater, she embraced the opportunity with joy and enthusiasm. But after only a month on the island, Brenda disappeared after a date with a fellow Lost Colony member. Her deceased body turned up 5 days later in the Albemarle Sound, and despite an extensive investigation, the murder remained unsolved until a journalist dug into the case and provided his personal theory of what happened. Here's a clip. The day she disappeared, Brenda dressed in a leopard print teddy, a multicolored blouse over that, and a maroon skirt. She wore her Miss Congeniality locket, brown sandals, and packed her blue and white canvas handbag with a braided rope handle. She placed her makeup and a paperback copy of the book Zorba the Greek inside. Brenda's co-workers first noticed something was wrong when she failed to show up for their Saturday performance on July 1st. Cora Twyford said she hadn't seen Brenda come home the night before. Her roommate Molly confirmed she hadn't seen Brenda after she herself had come in during the early morning hours of Saturday. Cora talked to Renee Rains, who then mentioned Brenda's absence to John Fox, the general manager of the play. The group knew Brenda had been out with Danny Barber the night before. They'd seen the two leave together. John pulled Danny aside during the intermission and asked when he'd last seen Brenda. Danny told him, "Around 2 a.m. this morning, I let her out in front of her house." Cora knew this wasn't true and contradicted him in front of their manager. Danny then changed his story and said they'd gone to the Nag's Head fishing pier and then back to a home he shared with his 2 other roommates on Burnside Road. He said they'd drank beer, listened to a record, and then he fell asleep around 2 a.m. When he woke up, Brenda was gone, and he assumed she'd walked back to the boarding house where she'd been staying. Based on a diagram and aerial view of Manteo that the Durham Sun published in August of 1967, there were 2 routes Brenda could have taken back to the Twyford's house. Both of those routes were probably at least a 2-mile walk. By the end of that first evening, a concerned John Fox had reported Brenda missing to the local sheriff's office. Up next is episode 128, 4 North Carolina Serial Killers. I shared 4 stories of serial killers from North Carolina in this episode: Terry Alvin Hyatt, John Wayne Boyer, Leslie Eugene Warren, and Henry Louis Wallace. Here's a clip.
The next serial killer I want to talk about, Henry Louis Wallace, is probably the most prolific here in North Carolina. I shared the story of his crime spree in episode 89. In the early 1990s, a string of rapes and murders occurred in East Charlotte. Because the killer used different methods and cleaned up crime scenes, investigators had no idea the murders were connected until he escalated and got sloppy, stealing items from the victims and leaving evidence behind. Community members became convinced the murders went unsolved because they involved working-class Black women, many of whom were young mothers. But when the suspect was arrested, friends and family were devastated to learn it was a person they had known and trusted all along, someone who blended into their community and took advantage of the kindness of others.
And the fifth most downloaded episode on Spotify was episode 134, Missing and Murdered While on Vacation. There are many stories of people going missing and being murdered in the Carolinas while traveling or on vacation. I talked about the decades-long mystery of Jane and Jock Doe from South Carolina, New York resident Brittany Drexel, who went missing after a spring break trip to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Judith Smith, who went missing from Pennsylvania and was discovered murdered months later in North Carolina, and the murders of Ohio residents Wesley and Bonnie Mahaffey, who were killed in Asheville after winning a free vacation. Here's a clip from that episode. Wesley and Bonnie Mahaffey's story also appeared in episode 45, along with Judith Smith's. In 1986, a free vacation getaway turned into a nightmare for the Ohio couple visiting Asheville, North Carolina, when they were found murdered at an overlook called Buzzard Rock. Wesley and Bonnie Mahaffey, ages 33 and 29 respectively, had traveled to the area from Hanover Township, Ohio, after winning a 3-day trip to Asheville through Wesley's job. The couple had been staying at a nearby hotel, the Great Smokies Hilton, and a member of the maid service saw them come out of their room as they left for a day of sightseeing on May 18, 1986. Their bodies were found early the next morning by a group of teenage boys. They had both been shot multiple times with a .38 caliber handgun. Buzzard Rock is an area that's located between Beaver Dam Road and the Blue Ridge Parkway, and it has always been known as a popular place to watch the sunset because of its beautiful views. But an article in the Asheville Citizen-Times that ran at the time of the murders quoted a nearby local resident as saying the area had developed a reputation as a meeting place for drug dealers. Wesley's pockets were pulled inside out and his wallet was missing. There were no signs Bonnie had been sexually assaulted. A Black Mountain resident named Roy Lee Fox was eventually arrested and charged with the murders in 1987. Local law enforcement officials believed he had come across the couple at Buzzard Rock, robbed, and murdered them. He had previously been convicted of murdering an acquaintance named Morris Sams in 1986 and an elderly woman named Ovella Jean Lunsford in the late 1960s during a home robbery. But the case was largely circumstantial, and the charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. Fox died in 1992 while serving time in prison for other charges. To date, the murder of Wesley and Bonnie Mahaffey remains unsolved. Before we continue, let's take a quick break to talk about our sponsors. Are you looking to level up your writing in the new year or try something new? If so, you should check out the online classes at WOW Women on Writing. At the first of the year, you can choose from classes like Writing is for the Birds, a workshop inspired by our avian friends, on February 17th, or Shaping Creative Nonfiction with a Narrative Arc on March 20th. I'm helping moderate these two workshops via Zoom and can vouch that instructor Ashley Harris is enthusiastic, engaging, and sure to have you leaving both sessions with pages full of new ideas. Visit wow-womenonwriting.com and click on the Classes tab for more information or to register for a workshop. After several years of using the products, I'm still singing the praises of the SkinX Erin products offered by Midnight Riff. I love Erin Sanderson's skincare line so much, I became an ambassador so I could earn a small commission off telling everyone just how much I appreciate the Pre-Cleanse Oil, Hydrating Beauty Oil, and Perfecting Night Oil. My skin is acne-free even in the throes of perimenopause, and looking brighter and more youthful than ever. And don't just take my word for it. Here are a few recent reviews from other people who love the products just as much as I do. Leah says, I have been using the 3-piece set for a few years now. I can't live without it. It truly is the holy grail of skincare. My skin is so soft and healthy. I'm a lifelong user. I love it. Another user wrote, I love this oil. I'm 47 and my skin soaks it up. I've been using it for many years now, so it's like hot sauce. I use it on everything. Itchy knees, cuts on my hand, my daughter's dry lips, and of course my face. Now I'm ready for the groupie-sized gallon bottle. On average, the oils last around 3 months, and despite their names, they won't make your skin oily. Try them out for yourself with my code MissingCarolinas10 for 10% off your order. And now, let's get back to the show. Let's talk stats from Apple Podcasts now. Followers are 2,500, up 3% from last year. The average podcast rating is 4.7 stars out of 146 ratings. The top cities listening to this podcast are Charlotte, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Raleigh, and New York City. The top countries listening to the podcast through Apple are the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. The Apple Podcast top episodes were a little different from the Spotify streams. For Apple, the top 5 most downloaded episodes were episode 159, The Murder of Michelle Young in Raleigh. In November of 2006, a quiet residential neighborhood in Raleigh was stunned when 29-year-old Michelle Young was found murdered in her home, while her 2-year-old daughter was emotionally distraught but unharmed physically. Michelle's husband had been traveling for work at the time of her death. When he learned of the crime, he cooperated with investigators only to a certain extent, staying quiet about all other details of their life, or the night she was murdered, until a civil lawsuit finally prompted a criminal trial 3 years later. Here's a clip from that episode. In the days following the discovery of Michelle's body, residents learned more information about Michelle and Jason Young. Michelle Fisher Young was originally from Sayville, New York, on Long Island. Family described her as an energetic young woman who excelled at gymnastics. When she was a senior in high school, her cheer squad won a championship at the local Long Island competition. She traveled to Raleigh to try out for the cheerleading team at NC State University and won a spot. She began college in the fall of 1995. Michelle quickly made her mark as a member of the Wolfpack, cheering on the football team and men's and women's basketball teams her first year. But after that, Michelle decided to retire from cheerleading and transition into sorority life with Alpha Delta Pi. As was her nature, she immersed herself in the organization and by her junior year took on the role of organizing recruitment and the selection of new members for all of the university's sororities, coordinating events for more than 1,000 students. While working in Greek life leadership, she studied accounting and spent time with her boyfriend, Jason. The two had met a year earlier when they were both dancing at a place called the Have a Nice Day Cafe with their respective friend groups. Michelle was obviously talented in choreography, while Jason chose to stay close to the bar. Michelle's friends said she coerced him out onto the dance floor, and they became a couple soon after. They were married in October of 2003. A dog Jason had rescued carried the wedding bands down the aisle of the chapel they rented out in downtown Raleigh. By the following spring, they welcomed daughter Cassidy. Michelle used her accounting degree and accepted a position as a senior tax consultant with Progress Energy. At the time of Michelle's death, 32-year-old Jason was out of town as he worked as a medical software salesman. Next was episode 160, Todd Kohlhepp's Crimes in South Carolina. When a South Carolina couple went missing in the fall of 2016, their friends and family knew something was wrong. Using cell phone data, investigators tracked the pair to an isolated piece of property in Woodruff, and what they found there was shocking. The discovery would also provide answers to an unsolved quadruple homicide from 2003. Here's a clip. A year after his conviction, Todd wrote a letter to the Herald Journal in Spartanburg, South Carolina, claiming he had killed more people than 7. In the 8-page letter, he said, "Yes, there's more than 7. I tried to tell the investigators, and I did tell the FBI, but it was blown off. It's not an addition problem, it's a multiplication problem. Leaves the state and leaves the country. Thank you, private pilot's license." At the time, the FBI's office in Columbia said they didn't have new information to provide about allegations of additional potential victims. In 2019, it became apparent that Todd Kohlhepp showed no remorse for his crimes and was attempting to profit off them. South Carolina prohibits inmates from doing this, and Fox Carolina News began investigating after receiving a tip. Todd had been communicating with several different people from a prison-issued tablet. A tipster provided Fox with an envelope full of copies of artwork, photos, signed confessions, and autopsy reports for his victims. Todd had signed the pages and included a thumbprint, intending to sell the copies. In his emails, he said he was working on designs for t-shirts with the letters SKTK printed on them, as well as other prints with sayings such as, "What would Kohlhepp do?" and "My Glock has anger issues." The news story prompted the Department of Corrections in South Carolina to take away Todd's tablet and move him to the most secure cell block in the state. Because he was caught abusing privileges and violating prison rules, he lost canteen and visitor privileges for 30 days. The Office of the Inspector General opened an official investigation into his business plans. Based on copies of emails obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, Fox News shared Todd had been messaging with a number of individuals who planned to sell his designs and signed memorabilia, as well as a book told from his point of view. Next is episode 161, Missing in November. I shared stories of people who went missing in North Carolina during the month of November from the show catalog. Jeffrey Mays, Ted Wall, Bill Hollingsworth, and Joseph Johnson are all presumed to be lost at sea. Young Chang walked away from a nursing home more than 20 years ago in Asheville. Teresa Fetter disappeared from Wilmington after falling in with the wrong crowd. And Horry County officials have identified a man whose identity was unknown after he drowned in a hotel pool in 2016, until recently. Here's a clip from the episode. This past week, the Myrtle Beach Police Department announced they had discovered the identity of a man they'd been referring to as Horry County John Doe. In February of 2016, a man drowned in a pool at Ocean Creek Plantation in North Myrtle Beach. The man was not a guest of the hotel at the time. Police didn't see any local missing persons reports matching the man's description. He was a black male in his mid-20s. He was wearing basketball shorts but had no signs of injuries on his body. He had clothes and personal belongings found near his body on a chair, but no room key or anything that could identify him. The coroner's office ruled his death to be an accidental drowning. Investigators took his fingerprints, but the case soon went cold. In 2023, the Horry County Coroner's Office submitted a DNA profile from the young man to Othram in the Woodlands, Texas, to determine if forensic genealogy could help identify the young man. Because of this process, a forensic genealogy team located potential relatives of Horry County John Doe. A follow-up investigation led to a positive identification of Malquan Tyreek Hawkins, who was 22 years old at the time of his death. He was last believed to have lived in the New Hanover County area. Malquan's biological mother currently lives in North Carolina, but she had given the young man up for adoption when he was an infant. He ended up in the state's foster care system, where he aged out at age 18. Officials say they will continue to investigate what brought him to Myrtle Beach, why he was at the hotel pool, and what happened to him. Malquan's case is the 8th one in the state of South Carolina, where officials have identified a previously unknown individual through genetic genealogy and Othram. Episode 164, The Abduction and Murder of Peg Catino in South Carolina, is next. In December of 1970, 13-year-old Peg Catino went missing in the middle of the afternoon in Sumter County. Police wondered if her father's job as a state senator made her a target for kidnapping and ransom. Peg was found murdered a few weeks later, and while a man was convicted of the crime and sent to prison, many in the area wonder if he was really responsible for Peg's death. Here's a clip. Margaret Peg Catino was born and raised in Sumter County, South Carolina. She was the daughter of South Carolina State Senator James Catino, a Democrat. Peg was 13 years old and an 8th grader at Alice Drive Junior High School. She played on the school's varsity basketball team. Peg had grown up campaigning for her father and sang in her church's youth choir. On December 18, 1970, she left her home to walk to the nearby Willow Drive School, intending to have lunch with her younger sister. She never made it to the school. Her parents, who had last seen her that morning when she left, reported her missing around 2:30 p.m. Peg was described as standing 5 feet 2 inches tall, with brunette shoulder-length hair and blue eyes. She was wearing a blue blouse, white skirt, and a polka dot sash. Local police launched a search shortly after Peg was reported missing. The Sumter Sheriff's Office and the South Carolina Highway Patrol also got involved. The nearby Shaw Air Force Base provided a helicopter and several bloodhounds. At first, there was no evidence to suspect foul play. Then a few days into the search, the FBI got involved on the grounds that Peg could have been kidnapped. A ransom call never came, though. While the search was ongoing, the local community came together and rallied around Peg's family. 4 Sumter County radio stations broadcast a prayer for the family, followed by 30 seconds of silence. Senator Catino stated that never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined such a response as this community has shown in a situation such as this. A $5,000 reward was offered for information on Peg's disappearance and whereabouts. Even with this reward, the police were left with only one lead: that a classmate had seen Peg in the backseat of a beige 1964 Mercury Comet on the day she disappeared, driven by a man alongside another female passenger. And the fifth most downloaded episode on Apple Podcasts was episode 158, The Murder of Dr. Joe Smith in Lancaster, South Carolina. South Carolina physician and assistant county coroner Dr. Joe Smith Jr. probably never expected to be the subject of a murder investigation, but when he was found murdered in his home on October 29, 1979, all signs pointed to his killer being someone who knew him well. Here's a clip. 51-year-old Dr. Joe Smith was a fixture around the Lancaster, South Carolina community for many years. He had a practice as a general practitioner, worked as the jail physician for Chester County and the city, and as the assistant coroner for Lancaster County. He'd grown up in Anderson, where his father was employed by Swift & Company. After graduating from high school, he joined the military. After a tour of duty, he entered medical school. It was Bob Perry, the owner of Perry's Pharmacy, which was located on York Street next to Smith's office, that first noticed something was wrong. He was used to seeing Joe come in and out of the pharmacy multiple times a day. Perry saw Joe early that morning, but not the next day. He began inquiring at the physician's office about the whereabouts of his friend on Tuesday. At first, Joe's staff thought he had gone to Anderson to help assist in getting his mother into a nursing home, but then she called the office on Tuesday and said she hadn't seen him. Perry went to the sheriff, and they decided to do a welfare check on his friend and colleague at his riverfront home south of Fort Lawn in Chester County, about 5 miles west of Lancaster. Joe was separated from his wife Betty at the time and lived alone. There, around 7 p.m., Detective Jim Boswell, former Fort Lawn Police Chief Kenneth Eagle, and Joe Smith's son-in-law Daniel Bailey went into the home. They removed a window pane from the kitchen door, unlocked the door, and went inside. There, they found Joe Smith deceased in his bedroom, underneath a pile of clothes taken from his closet, and also underneath an electric blanket, which was still turned on. The man had been shot multiple times in the chest and the head with 2 .38 caliber pistols. I couldn't help thinking about the hundreds of crime scenes and natural deaths that we had been together investigating, and here I was investigating his death, said Lancaster County Sheriff Nay Parks. He described Joe Smith as having the kind of analytical mind necessary for investigating death scenes and the contacts around the state to get answers quickly. The preliminary autopsy report showed the wounds were not self-inflicted. The presence of the electric blanket made it difficult to pinpoint the physician's time of death. Investigators found no signs of forced entry into his one-story brick home. In addition to covering true crime and missing person stories from the Carolinas, I shared several different interviews in 2025 that I'm really proud of. Those interviews include Brian and Cameron Santana, authors of A Murder on Campus, about the Ginger Olsen cold case from Asheville in episode 124, Terry Harmon, author of Convoluted, the book about a still unsolved triple homicide from Boone in episode 131, Helen Zuman, author of Mating in Captivity, a memoir about her time in a neo-hippie cult on Zindick Farm in North Carolina in episode 139. Shelley Taylor, local program history specialist from the Iredell County Public Library in episode 141. Dick Harpootlian, a South Carolina attorney and author of the true crime book Dig Me a Grave in episode 162. And Stephanie Tinsley, host and creator of the podcast Everything They Missed in episode 163. I also produced a bonus episode in June of this past year, which featured a discussion with author Hope Anderson, a North Carolina-based author who recently released the suspense thriller novel Mother Love in episode 147. And that brings us to our recap of the year 2025 and the podcast Missing in the Carolinas. Whether you are a new listener or have been around from the beginning, I appreciate every comment, listen, share, and word of encouragement. I'll be taking some time off in January to regroup and work on a few other creative projects, but I'll be back before you know it. Happy New Year. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people and true crimes profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. And don't forget to check out our sponsor, Wow Women on Writing, and the great programs and writing contests they have to support writers at wow-womenonwriting.com. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. All episodes are researched and written by me, Renee Robertson, with sound editing provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.